Have you ever eaten the treats you offer to your pets? Why not? Afraid of what they contain? At Scout and Zoe's, we use premium USA-sourced, human-grade raw ingredients in all of our treats. I'm Cindy Dunstan-Quirk, founder and chief dog lover at Scout and Zoe's. I eat our treats. Yes, really. They are pretty tasty. Do you know of any other owner of a pet treat company who eats the treats they produce? I consider my pups my family and only want the best for them, and that includes great treats made with human-grade quality ingredients I trust. Safe for me, safe for my pups, definitely safe for your fur kids. Visit us at scoutandzoes.com for the yummiest treats, chews, and raw products in the universe. Because at Scout and Zoe's, your pets are our family.
Hello, pups and kittens, and welcome to another fun-filled and informative episode of the Groomer Next Door podcast. I'm your host, Chris Green, and join us this week is a man who preserves the image and the majesty of our furry friends. We have Chuck Rupert coming on the podcast talking about his company, Second Life Freeze Dry. And I have to say, if it wasn't for a friend of mine who asked, haven't we done this episode yet? I probably would not have even thought about it. So thank you, Troy. Yes, Troy, this is all for you, buddy. It was just funny because I never thought about this. And once I did the research and realized, wait, there's a difference between taxidermy and freeze dry? What? So bear with the content a little bit because I know it might be a little bit different than our normal stuff, but we really love science, and this right here is science at its best. And so, I've thought about this a lot, and I'm thinking, Katana, I love her. She's the symbol of the podcast, but I could never freeze dry or have her taxidermied. It just isn't possible. Even though taxidermy wouldn't even be proper for her or any dog or cat, and we'll go into that later, but I just don't think I could have her around in that capacity. But I respect all those out there who want to have their furry friends permanently implemented into their homes and stay in with them forever. And I respect that. And for that reason, I think this episode is very important. I think Chuck is doing a great job, and he is going to share a very funny and interesting story at the end. So stay tuned for that. And by that sound, he is about to enter the podcast studio. So with that said, welcome Chuck Rupert to the podcast.
Oh, hello. Hold on a sec. Dad, we have a guest on the podcast.
All right, this week, take two. We have Chuck Rupert from Second Life Freeze Dry on the podcast, who we recorded with already once, but with the lovely parts of technology, we had to re-record. So thank you again for being on the podcast.
You're welcome again. I guess second time's a charm.
Second time should be. All should work out really well. It's the fun part about doing stuff without cassette. You remember how digital recorders had the cassette? You knew it was working. Now you have no physical thing to touch, and well, here we are.
Yeah. Plug it in the backside, find out it's not there.
Yes, and that's typically it. So let's go back to your origin story and tell us all about yourself and how Chuck Rupert became the king of freeze dry.
So I'm not sure I'm the king, but I'm doing my share, that's for sure. Well, like everything in life, it just sometimes things just sort of happen. That's how this went. I was in the oil and gas business for 20 years, basically my career. and things change there pretty often. It's a fluid business, and where I am locally, things changed a lot. Stuff went elsewhere, and writing was on the wall that was probably going to be the case. So I started looking, trying to figure out what I was going to be when I grew up, and somehow stumbled onto this as a pretty interesting idea. So I was moving down that path before I lost my job, and then at 50 I suddenly lost my job and sort of fast-tracked me down the road. And part of that process was I looked up, other people in the business, trying to decide if I need to talk to somebody, number one, and see if somebody can help me down the road if this is what I want to do. And luckily for me, a guy named Mike McCullough, Max Taxidermy and Freeze Dry is about 4.5 hours from me, just barely in Pennsylvania, but still on the other side of Pennsylvania. And he was kind of the guru of the industry, a leader, a guy who started the whole thing, been on 2020, Wall Street Journal. He's the guy. So I hunted him up, and he was more than happy to talk to me and show me around and tell me anything I wanted to know. And I was worried about stepping on his toes more than anything. And he assured me that wasn't a problem. There was plenty out there for both of us, and he'd help me if that's what I wanted to do. So that's where I went. And just happenstance after that, between what was going on in his life and my life, just kind of made sense. I ended up buying out his business and then growing it from there to where I am now.
And, an interesting way. I mean, it's something you probably never thought about, and yet all of a sudden it's right there in front of you. You're like, well, why not me? And that's probably
there you go.
It is.
That's pretty much how it is. And again, it made sense for me. It's, it fits in my mold, that's for sure. It's not something for everybody, and it's not something that just anybody could do. But for me, it made a lot of sense. I'm a critter guy. Like most critters, as much or better than most people. Had pets all my life. I'm an outdoor guy, so I'm always more attuned to animals, I think, than anything else. Again, for that reason, it just kind of makes sense.
It's a lot easier to have a conversation, and this is going to sound funny to some people, so maybe real to others, but it's a lot easier to have a conversation with a dog or cat or some kind of furry creature than it is a lot of people. And they don't judge
Quite
you.
Right. True story there, for sure.
Oh, it's funny how that must be. Because I know I'm in that same boat. So let's go into that soapbox moment. What gets you on a soapbox when it comes to either taxidermy, which we'll get into, or freeze dry and how people perceive it?
Right. Well, I think there's most people don't have a perception of those things being different, and I think a lot of times when people find me, if they go looking for, hey, this is what I think I want to do with my pet, they look up pet taxidermy, and then by happenstance or in a roundabout way, they end up finding the freeze dry process and hopefully find me as part of that process. But they're even though ultimately you're generally looking at the same kind of product. You're looking at an animal that is preserved for somebody to having to hold or to view for forever. The process themselves is much different, and the freeze dry process in particular lends itself much more to the pet side of the game than it does to the wild animal side of the game, or at least the big wild animal side of the game. Mostly just because the processes are different, and your relationship with your pet is different than a guy's relationship with a trophy, and that's usually what's associated with taxidermy.
And I'm gonna throw this one into it because honestly, we talked about this before off air, and that was what drives me nuts about the whole concept of taxidermy or even freeze dry is it still to this day has that Norman Bates kind of marriage to it, and I always think that that's just an unfair lump sum. It's not the same thing. It was just a coincidence. So it always drives me nuts. It's like people really honestly want to immortalize their dog or cat or bird or whatever, and this is a great way of doing it. Don't lump them into being a Norman Bates. I mean, that's just not fair.
Yeah, no, that's true, and it's certainly, it's not for everybody. Obviously, there are, people have different views of it. Some people find it completely morbid and would never consider that in a million years, and that's their right. Other people, everybody that comes my direction, at least anyways, they find comfort in that. That's what they're looking for, and on the back side of it, I find that that's always what they get out of it. That's what they came looking for, and that's what they get. And that's the difference. We came from the taxidermy versus freeze dry thing, and the reason for freeze dry making sense for pets is a simple reason that the nuts and bolts, the nitty gritty, the gory stuff is with taxidermy. You remove the hide from an animal and you put it on a form. You send it out to get tanned, or you tan it yourself, and then you stretch it over a form while it's somewhat wet, and you put eyes in and you sew things back up, and then it dries and you tweak it while it's drying, and you end up with ultimately a good-looking facsimile of that creature. And that's fine, and it's beautiful, and taxidermists, some in particular, do some fantastic work, some amazing stuff. But the biggest difference in that versus you doing your pet in a preserved form is that with taxidermy, that's what happens. And so the taxidermist gets your deer hide, he measures things up, and he orders a form from a taxidermy catalog that deer pretty much fits on. If you were to do that with your dog or your cat, there's not a form for that animal. So you have to morph things even more. You have to create a form. You have to spend a ton of time doing that. With freeze-dry process, I don't need to do that. I don't need to take everything apart. So I'm able to retain and save the character, the features, the things that are important to you about your animal. And that's the biggest difference.
And it's really your furry friend opposed to really just the fur over a statuette in a sense. It's
right.
I get that.
Yeah. Yep. It's in essence a model of that animal, and again, looks fantastic. But and I use it all the time. It gets repetitive for me, anyways. Maybe not for everybody else, but the analogy that's the best analogy that I have is a hunter guy shoots a big buck. He drives around for a couple hours, shows it to his buddies, drops it off to the taxidermist, gets it back a year later, and it's a beautiful representation of that deer. If he would have known that deer, lived with that deer for 10 years, like you do with your cat or your dog, he would drop it off, go pick it back up, and say, that's not my deer. Because no matter what your pet is, your cat, your dog, whatever breed it is, even, if it's a purebred dog and they all look relatively the same, if there were 10 of them in the room and you walked into the room, you would know which dog is yours.
Right.
Because they have certain personalities, characteristics, features that are theirs, and that's what stays in this process versus traditional taxidermy.
And it's funny, we've now talked a few times, and as time has even gone on, I originally was like, oh boy, it would be very difficult for me to do that. But as I've talked to you, and again, this is now our third conversation, I honestly am more comfortable with the whole freeze dry and would probably go through with it without any questions. I would probably be like, yes, this is perfect. Way more than ever before. And again, we've had this conversation that, yes, it's a hard conversation to have, and I'm pretty sure you have this on a daily basis, much more than I do, but it is the evolution of life. We all know you're born, you pay taxes, you die. And, or if you're a dog or cat or furry friend, you're born, you eat, sleep, poop, you die. It's just an unfortunate part of life. And, for the people out there, like my katana, I think to myself, gosh, I just don't know what I'm going to do when she passes. She is a symbol of so much, and I'm pretty sure that this speaks for anybody who has their furry friends. They're such a symbol. And it's like, how do you say goodbye to that? And then when you mentioned how taxidermy pretty much has this, in a sense, it's a statue of what was, but it's really not them, where you can have the full detail of your dog, cat, ferret, whatever it is, always around that's going to look just like what they were.
it to me makes so much sense. And again, if it wasn't for having these conversations with you, I probably would just think taxidermy. And again, completely incorrect.
Yeah. Right. No, it's different. And I think, that's the deal. It's just people aren't exposed to it. It's just not mainstream, not out there as much. And that's the fact. A lot of people just don't know it even exists. I hear that all the time when I get animals from people is, wow, this is what I'm looking for. This is what I want to do. Thank God I found you. I sure wish I'd have known you when Fluffy passed away 3 years ago because, we did bury her, we did have her cremated or whatever, and they would have rather done something different. So it's a matter of just simply getting it out there and letting people know that it's an option. Again, not for everybody. That's understood, and I don't have room for everybody, so that's okay.
And, it's funny because you said something right there that's the key. It's not mainstream yet. See, that's the thing.
Could be.
It's going to be. I remember a couple years ago talking about CBD and how that was completely taboo.
Right.
And you could hardly get it anywhere. You had to be in a couple states. Now you can get it anywhere, and it's very popular. So that's just how trends work. Overnight, they become this mass crave, and I honestly think freeze-dry is going to become the next big thing. So I'm willing to put my hand on that and say, yep, that's going to be the next big thing. Now,
okay.
Here's the crazy part, and the crazy question, which is, well, one of many, but one of them is, how does it work? How do you do this?
Yep, it's truthfully nothing that's magic. That's scientific, obviously, and has to be. But in that regard, it's not magic. It's you take the animal, and number one, first step, back to the sort of blood and gore sort of stuff. But I need to take major organs out of an animal just because those things don't dry well. They're sealed up in their own right, and they don't dry. Now, that said, there's ways to deal with those if somebody wants to retain them, either inside or outside the animal, but that's a different discussion. But as normal operating procedure, organs come out, and a filler goes in there. It's an Excelsior wood wool type product that goes in to fill that cavity. And again, the rest of the animal stays intact, so everything else that your critter is there. So then I get them prepped and posed in whatever position they're going to be, which is a lot of pictures and conversation with the owner that says this is what we want to do. That's the big part of work is that day where everything gets formed and propped up and posed like it's going to be. They get a little extra fluid into them just because when muscle tissue dries, it's going to shrink a little bit. So to mitigate that, I get some extra fluid in any muscle tissue that I can. Put eyes in, again, whether they're open or closed. Eyes are mostly water. So in that process, again, they're going to kind of shrivel up, but I don't take them out. They stay in. A concave convex glass eye goes in over top of them. The animal goes in my walk-in freezer where I spend the rest of that part of that day tweaking things as they freeze, getting ears level and eyes open and closed just like we want them. Just everything just so, because once that animal gets refrozen in the freezer, standard freezer now, that's the way it's going to stay when I put it in the dryer. So a couple weeks down the road, I'm shutting a dryer down, pulling some animals out that are cycling out, and that guy is going to go in the dryer where the magic takes place, if you want to call it that. But again, it's simply low temperature and vacuum. So over time, removing the air from that chamber causes moisture to come out of the tissue, and when moisture comes out of that tissue, it gets preserved, so that after X amount of time, depending on the size of the animal, it's all based on mass. So, but just as a relative basis, your let's call an average 10 or 12 pound small dog or cat is going to still be in that dryer for a minimum of 4 months for that process to take place. So 4 months in there, let's say, and Fluffy or Fido's generally dry, get them out. We do a good check, leave them out for a week or so to make sure, and then a little bit of finish work on the backside, and they're ready to go home.
And I think that, again, I hear this story for the second time, and I'm going, oh my gosh, it still shocks me how long it takes. I'm just always, in a sense, flabbergasted. It's like, wow, it's not an overnight success. It takes time, which...
It's an exercise in patience is what it is for everybody, and me included.
Yeah, I would imagine it's like, okay, Fluffy needs to go home now. You've been here 6 months. It's time to go.
Right. Not for you to go. But that's the nature of the beast. Now, that said, you could do things much faster. The process could go faster. The reason it goes slow is, number one, it does do a better job of drying, but more in particular, if you speed it up, then that's when things start to shrink more and things start to morph and change, and you lose some of that feature that we're trying to keep. So that's the key to doing a good job, is to do it slow, follow the procedure that gets you there to have the outcome that you want. And I talk to a lot of people who call inquiring about this and that, who are obviously shopping around and talking to other people, and that's fine. That's me to a T. I'm a research guy. If I'm gonna do something, I'm gonna find out everything I can about it before I decide what I'm gonna do. And that's the only thing I will ever caution people or say something negative about in another direction is that's just simply a fact. To do this right, that's how it has to happen. And there are a few people out there, places out there that are advertising, hey, I'll get your animal back in 6 weeks. They'll get your animal back in 6 weeks, but in 6 months, you're going to have issues. So I tell people that routinely is, I'd love to have your business. I'm not going to fight you for it. But no matter where you go, please understand that is absolutely important.
And you know what? It goes back to the little book that we all read when we were little kids, The Tortoise and the Hare. Slow and steady wins the race.
Every time.
And you know what?
Like it or not.
Right. And what's funny is that this is a great example of a great deal in life. Fast is not always the best. When they say that, and that goes for a lot of different things. I've seen it in grooming. I've seen it in so many different fields of the pet industry alone. And it's always, we're going to cut corners because we're going to get it back to you ASAP. Well, that does not help. I want it done right. So, yeah.
Yep. So that's just one thing to keep in mind if somebody decides they're going to head down this road, that understand that it's a timely procedure, and it has to be. That's just how it is. My general time period for everybody on my end is 6 to 9 months, and I added a second dryer to my business just a year ago in order to keep that time frame, because I think I'm not willing to put myself out more than a year with backed up work, because now I'm uncomfortable, and I think that's long enough to ask somebody to wait to get the cut back. So that's the time frame that I generally work in. Now, every once in a while, I've got a bigger animal that's going to be beyond that 9 months, and every once in a while, there's a smaller animal that's going to be inside of that 6 month period. But that's kind of the general time frame, and that's where 90% of everything falls.
Right. Now, we've talked about the process, but we didn't talk about the pre-process. And, of course, it always starts with how does it work? Because I find that that's the science, and the science is very interesting. Now, when a pet parent has decided, maybe they've found that, and we'll just use the term Fluffy, has cancer, which seems to be the unfortunate leading cause right now, or hip dysplasia. And they know that their loved one is probably not going to be around for too much longer, and they contact you. Tell us what the process is like from that stage of that conversation beginning before we go into the next, into that whole process of freeze dry.
Right. Yeah, before the nuts and bolts is actually as important as the process itself. And I do get quite a few of those calls which are, hey, this is what we're looking at. We know this is coming, and this is something we're thinking about, so what do we need to do? And that's great, because those people are ultimately prepared. I also get a ton of calls. I had one this morning. Hey, this is what happened just now. what do I need to do? And thankfully they get a hold of me in a timely manner, because that is key. The most number one important thing that somebody needs to do is to get the animal frozen as soon as possible. As soon as possible usually means within a half a day or so. I mean, you don't need to run from, okay, the animal's done, we need to get him in the freezer, or we've just been to the vets, we've had to make that decision, he's been euthanized. And normally a veterinarian office is able to help you with that and keep the animal for a bit. But the bottom line is they need to be in plastic, wrapped in plastic, nothing else, ideally, sealed up, get as much air out as you can, and get them in the freezer. Once you've done that, now there's no rush. That's the other upside to this is, if you're even thinking down this road, like, hey, that's maybe something I think I want to do, I'm intrigued by it, I'm interested in it, and I need to find out more. If you get the animal in the freezer and plastic and in the freezer, now there's no hurry. We can wait months and months and months, and you don't eliminate any other options. So if you do decide, nah, that's just not for me, I'm going to bury the animal, or nah, that's just not for me, I'm going to have it cremated, you haven't eliminated any of those options. If you bury the animal or cremate the animal up front, you have eliminated the freeze-dry option. So that's just a function of the beast. And I also tell people that every day that call me is do that. Take your time, because none of us are in our right mind when that happens. We're in a process of grief. Let's face it. These are our little creatures that we've been living with, and you're not thinking straight. So do that. Take a couple of days at minimum. Take a couple of weeks if you need to, and make sure that's what you want to do. I don't want to be the dog and cat ambulance chaser guy that's saying, hey, you got to get that thing to me right away. This is what we need to do, because I'm afraid you're going to leave down the road. So that's imperative too. Is just make sure, and that's the good thing, is it's easy to do generally, and doesn't eliminate any option and leaves this one open.
I think it's absolutely the smartest piece of advice that I've heard in a long time as well. I was just thinking, well, my Fluffy was cremated. What can we do now? Well, unfortunately, there's not enough.
You can change urns.
Yes.
Right. You can change urns. That's about what you can do.
Oh yeah,
and interestingly, in that regard, I have had numerous folks call me after they've buried a dog or a cat, literally days later, and said, hey, now we found out about this. What can we do? Well, it's too late.
Yeah. And I guess that's what kind of made me laugh internally, and of course it popped out a little bit, is I can imagine if those questions do come out, I wouldn't even be surprised to find out somebody said, well, I had, Fluffy cremated, is there anything we can do now? I sadly can see that would be a question that would be had. Boy. Well,
yeah, I get them all.
Now, I'm going to save my favorite question for last, but the biggest furry friend you ever worked on was what?
I've done a couple of dogs that are in the 50 to 60 pound range. That's the biggest for me, and I truthfully pretty much quit taking animals that big. I've kind of cut my pricing scale off now at 25 pounds. Just mostly because of volume and trying to deal with as many people as I can and just keep things moving. The problem with an animal that size is, well, the physicality of handling them is difficult. Number one, I'm a one-man show, so that, you got a 60-pound animal, you have a 60-pound animal, and there's some prep work that needs done, and it becomes difficult. But that animal's going to take up that size and space in my dryer for a year or more, and that just eliminates the ability to put other things in that space and that time for that year, and it ends up getting almost to the point where I feel guilty telling someone what that needs to cost, because that's my commodity, is time and space in the dryer. So in order to take up that much time and space in my dryer, we're talking about a big deal, because I could have cycled 4 or 5 other animals through there 3 or 4 times in that time period. So for multiple reasons, I generally don't take anything over 25 pounds anymore. Now, I say that, and I've got 2 big dogs in my dryer right now because I'm a softie, and I talk to people, and they explain their situation, and that's the way it goes. But anyways, that's generally the biggest I've taken. And I could do bigger. I have one that's kind of a niche in a niche deal, too, because I do have one very large general purpose dryer. It's a vessel that's 36 by 84, so it's 36 inches in diameter and 84 inches long. So, it could house something pretty darn big, but again, mass is time, so that's the limiting factor.
I definitely can see a 100 and some pound dog coming to you at some point. And I know you're going to say no, but I know it's on that list. You're going to have no other choice. You'll be like, no, okay, I get it. I'll do it.
Yeah, that happens.
Now, my favorite, and this story is the one that honestly is one of the top 10 of my favorite stories I think I've ever heard in my life. And definitely on this podcast, it's a top probably 3, maybe it is the number 1. But the oddest request you've ever had to freeze dry is what?
Is a foot, a human foot.
I love this story. I do love it. Oh, so please share this story with everyone because it is epic.
Well, I got a phone call from a guy, and his mother was ill in the hospital, and they needed to remove her foot. And so he called me and said, "Hey, this is what's happening, and could you freeze dry her foot?" So obviously my wheels start turning, and I said, "Well, I physically, sure, I can freeze dry your mom's foot, but can I, in another sense, freeze dry your foot? Is it okay for me to have a human's foot in my shop and in my dryer?" So he was in California. I'm in Pennsylvania. So I use very little chemicals, but I do use a little bit of an embalming chemical on occasion. And so I called the funeral director guy that I deal with when I do that stuff and said, "Hey, here's what I got." Guy called me and wants me to freeze dry his mom's foot. And he said, "Wow, that's pretty odd." And I said, "Yeah, that's pretty odd." And I said, "Well, I can do it, but I need to know if I can do it." And he said, "Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know. So let me find out." So funeral directors have, counsel for PA funeral guys on the hook all the time. So he calls me back 15 minutes later and says, "Well, as far as they say, if somebody's willing to send you a foot, you can do anything you want with it." Which almost kind of surprised me, but okay. So I let the guy know that. Said, "Well, I'm game, and here we go. Let's figure this out." So we were still in the hospital at the time, and he assumed that, say it's next Friday, they were going to leave the hospital with Mom and the foot frozen, and he was going to ship me the foot frozen, and we were going to go down the road from there. And a couple days later, I get a call from a lady in the hospital, and she's asking me questions, and she's got my website punched up with dogs and cats and squirrels and hamsters and such on there, trying to determine, number one, if I'm legitimate. So apparently she determined that I was a legit operation and it was okay for them to send me the foot. Interesting side note in that is that they would not release the foot with Mom to the family, but they would send it from California to a guy who freeze dries pets in Pennsylvania. I found that a bit odd, but okay. So another day or two goes by, and I get a call from the body part shipper guy in the hospital, and he tells me, "Okay, this is what we're going to do. Overnight FedEx you this thing." So he FedExed me the foot, and we went from there, and the foot went in the dryer, and eventually went back home to the folks in California to hang on until they ultimately were going to bury it with Mom.
Wow. Even a second time around, still my favorite story. There may be
pretty interesting. Interestingly, too, though, it did have a bit of a more logical explanation, I guess, because that's the deal. It's like, why? But the lady from the hospital who called me was the one that explained that, because she was just surprisingly appreciative and and just glad that I was willing to do this, because these people apparently had been in a conundrum about this because they were Buddhists, and she's the one that educated me that Buddhists, Native American Indians, and some other culture/religion, you have to be buried complete. If you're not buried with all of your body parts, then that's the way you're going to be in the afterlife. So they could have cremated Mom's foot, but apparently nobody wanted. Some members of the family couldn't get doing that, so they decided this was the next logical option, and so they were going to bury the foot with Mom when Mom passed, and Mom would be complete in her afterlife. So I kept somebody complete, I guess.
I still think I'll probably listen to this over and over every time I want this story retold to myself, because it's still my favorite. Still my favorite.
Fairly interesting. Yep.
Well, tell everybody how they can get in touch with you, because I'm actually really sure you're going to be getting some contact about this, because I do think this is a trend that is going to definitely take off.
Okay. Well, not difficult. I've got a website that makes a pretty big presence on the internet. Second Life Freeze Dry is my business name. Second with the word SECOND. If you just Google Second Life Freeze Dry, you'll find me. If not, it's secondlifefreezedry.com. Pretty simple. Lots of information there. Pictures, a couple of media spots where I've done some videos. Facebook, where everybody talks about everything anymore. There, same deal, Second Life Freeze Dry. More timely information there, because I'm posting pictures as things are going home and getting done, and an occasional clip. I'm not super active there, but again, updated a lot more than the website is. But a lot of information in either one of those places, and ultimately, most of what I do when something's going down is I talk to people and they call me, because it's just that kind of deal. So you can get information there. You can get reminded about information there. But my phone's on my hip all the time. If I can answer the phone, I do. And if I don't, leave me a message, and I always call people back.
Well, there you have it, everyone. Chuck Rupert, Second Life, right here. And, second recording at the same point. Which is comical in its own. Well, thank you for being back, and for everybody else for being on the podcast. I really do appreciate you taking the time, and come back and share stories with us. I really enjoy them.
I always have them, and I'd be happy to.
Well, I'm Chris Green. Have a fantastic week. Goodbye, everybody.
Okay, gotta go, it's my bedtime.